Robert Francis Bobby Kennedy, commonly known by his initials RFK, was an American politician from Massachusetts. He served as a senator for New York from 1965 until his assassination in 1968. He was previously the 64th U.S. Attorney General from 1961 to 1964, serving under his elder brother, President John F. Kennedy, and his successor, President Lyndon B. Johnson, an icon of modern American liberalism, and a member of the Democratic Party. Kennedy ran for its presidential nomination in the 1968 election, after serving in the United States Naval Reserve as a seaman apprentice from 1944 to 1946. Kennedy graduated from Harvard College and the University of Virginia School of Law. Prior to entering public office, he worked as a correspondent for the Boston Post and as an assistant counsel to the Senate committee chaired by Joe McCarthy. He gained national attention as the chief counsel of the Senate Labor Rackets Committee from 1957 to 1959, where he publicly challenged Teamsters President Jimmy Hoffa over the corrupt practices of its union and authored The Enemy Within, a book about corruption in organized labor. Kennedy was the campaign manager for his brother John in the 1960 presidential election. He was appointed Attorney General after the successful election and served as the closest advisor to the president from 1961 to 1963. His tenure is best known for its advocacy for the civil rights movement, a crusade against organized crime and the mafia, and involvement in U.S. foreign policy related to Cuba. After his brother's assassination, he remained in office in the Johnson administration for a few months. He left to run for the United States Senate in New York in 1964, defeating Republican incumbent Kenneth Keating. In 1968, Kennedy was a leading candidate for the Democratic nomination for the presidency, appealing especially to poor African American, Hispanic, and Catholic voters. Shortly after midnight on June 5, 1968, after defeating Senator Eugene McCarthy in the California presidential primary, he was shot by Sirhan Sirhan, a 24-year-old Palestinian, and died the following day. Early life. Robert F. Kennedy was born on November 20, 1925, in Brookline, Massachusetts, the seventh child of businessman, politician Joseph P. Joe Kennedy, Sr., and philanthropist Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy. His older brothers were Joseph P. Kennedy, Jr. and John F. Jack Kennedy, who was elected the 35th President of the United States in 1960. His younger brother was longtime United States Senator Edward M. Ted Kennedy. All four of his grandparents were children of Irish immigrants. His father was a wealthy businessman and a leading Irish Catholic figure in the Democratic Party. After he stepped down as ambassador to the United Kingdom in 1940, Joe Sr. focused his attention on his firstborn, Joseph, Jr., planning that he would enter politics and be elected president. He also urged the younger children to examine and discuss current events in order to propel them to public service. After Joseph, Jr. was killed during World War II, the senior Kennedy's hopes fell on his second son, John, to become president. Joseph, Sr., had the money and connections to play a central role in the family's political ambitions. Kennedy's older brother John was often bedridden by illness and, as a result, became a voracious reader. Although he made little effort to get to know his younger brother during his childhood, John would take him for walks and regale him with the stories of heroes and adventures he had read. One of the favorite authors was John Bacon, who read the 39 Steps which influenced both Robert and John. John sometimes referred to Robert as Black Robert due to his prudishness and disposition. Unlike his older brothers, Kennedy took to heart the mother Rose's agenda for everything to have a purpose, which included visiting historic sites during family outings, visits to the church during morning walks, and games used to expand vocabulary and math skills. He described his position in the family hierarchy by saying, "When you come from that far down, you have to struggle to survive." Quote, he tried frequently to get his older brother's attention as they were growing up, but was seldom successful. In September 1927, the Kennedy family moved to Riverdale, New York, a wealthy neighborhood in the Bronx, then 2 years later, moved 5 miles northeast to Bronxville, New York. Kennedy spent summers with his family at their compound in Hyannisport, Massachusetts, and Christmas and Easter holidays at the winter home in Palm Beach, Florida, purchased in 1933. He attended public elementary school in Riverdale from kindergarten through 2nd grade, then Bronxville School, the public school in Bronxville, from 3rd through 5th grade. He repeated the 3rd grade. A teacher at Bronxville reflected that he was a regular boy. She added, "It seemed hard for him to finish his work sometimes, but he was only 10 after all." He then attended Riverdale Country School, a private school for boys in Riverdale, for 6th grade. He would later recall of his childhood, going to different schools, always having to make new friends, and that I was very awkward, and I was pretty quiet most of the time, and I didn't mind being alone. Quote, he developed an interest in American history, decorating his bedroom with pictures of U.S. presidents and filling his bookshelves with volumes on the American Civil War. He also became an avid stamp collector, once receiving a handwritten letter from Franklin Roosevelt, who was also a philatelist. In March 1938, Kennedy sailed with his mother and his 4 youngest siblings to England to join his father, who had begun serving as ambassador to the United Kingdom. He attended the private Gibbs School for Boys in London for 7th grade, returning to the United States just before the outbreak of World War II in Europe. In April 1939, he gave his first public speech at the laying of a cornerstone for a youth club in England. According to embassy and newspaper reports, his statements were penciled in his own hand and were delivered in a calm and confident manner. St. Paul's and Portsmouth Priory. In September 1939, Kennedy began 8th grade at St. Paul's School, an elite Protestant private preparatory school for boys in Concord, New Hampshire, that his father favored. However, after 2 months his mother, unhappy with the use of the Protestant Bible, took advantage of her ambassador husband's absence from Boston and withdrew Kennedy from St. Paul's. She enrolled him instead in Portsmouth Priory School, a Benedictine Catholic boarding school for boys in Portsmouth, Rhode Island, where there were morning and evening prayers along with Mass 3 times a week, and High Mass on Sundays. He attended Portsmouth for 8th through 10th grade. At Portsmouth Priory School, he was known as Mrs. Kennedy's little boy Bobby, after he introduced his mother to classmates, who made fun of them. He was defensive of his mother and on one occasion chased a student out of the dormitory after he commented on her appearance. He befriended Peter McClellan and wrote to him, when his brother John was serving in the U.S. Navy, that he would be visiting his brother, because he might be killed any minute. Kennedy blamed himself when his grades failed to improve. In letters to her son, Rose urged him to read more and strengthen his vocabulary. Rose also expressed disappointment and wrote that she did not expect him to let her down. He began developing in other ways, and his brother John noticed his increased physical strength. predicting that he would be bouncing me around plenty in 2 more years. Monks at Portsmouth Priory School regarded him as a moody and indifferent student. Father Damien Kearney, who was 2 classes behind him, reflected that he didn't look happy, nor did he smile much. According to Father Damien's review of school records, he was a mediocre student, except for history. Milton Academy. In September 1942, Kennedy transferred to his 3rd boarding school, Milton Academy, in Milton, Massachusetts, for 11th and 12th grades. His father, Joseph Kennedy, Sr., wanted Kennedy to transfer to Milton, believing it would better prepare his son for Harvard. At Milton, he met and became friends with David Hackett. He invited Hackett to join him for Sunday Mass. Hackett started accompanying him, and was impressed when Kennedy took it upon himself to fill in for a missing altar boy one Sunday. Hackett admired Kennedy's determination to bypass his shortcomings, and remembered him redoubling his efforts whenever something did not come easy to him, which included athletics, studies, success with girls, and popularity. Hackett remembered the 2 of them being misfits, a commonality that drew him to Kennedy, along with an unwillingness to conform to how others acted, even if doing so meant not being accepted. Kennedy's grades improved. One of his first relationships was with a girl named Biddy Bailey. The pair were photographed together when he walked her home after chapel on a Sunday night. Bailey was fond of him and remembered him as being very appealing. She recalled him being funny, separate, larky, outside the cliques, private all the time. Soon after he transferred to Milton, he pressed his father to allow him to enlist, as he wanted to catch up to his brothers who were both serving in the military. Kennedy had arrived at Milton unfamiliar with his peers and made little attempt to know the names of his classmates. He called most of the other boys fella instead. For this, he was nicknamed Fella. Most of the school students had come in 8th and 9th grade, and cliques had already been formed. Despite this, his schoolmates would later say the school had no prejudice. He had an early sense of virtue. He disliked dirty jokes and bullying, once stepping in when an upperclassman tried bothering a younger student. The headmaster at Milton would later summarize that he was a very intelligent boy, quiet and shy, but not outstanding, and he left no special mark on Milton. Relationship with parents. In Kennedy's younger years, his father dubbed him the runt of the family and wrote him off. Close family friend Lem Billings once remarked to Joe Sr. that he was the most generous little boy, and Joe Sr. replied that he did not know where his son got that. Billings commented that the only similarity between Robert and Joe Sr. was their eye color. As Kennedy grew, his father worried that he was soft on others, conflicting with his ideology. In response, Kennedy developed a tough persona that masked his gentle personality, attempting to appease his father. Biographer Judy Mills read that Joe Sr.'s lack of interest in Robert was evident by the length of time it took for him to decide to transfer him to Milton Academy. Both Joe Jr. and John attended the exclusive Protestant prep school Choate from the freshman year, while Robert was already a junior by the time he was enrolled at Milton. Despite his father's disdain, Kennedy continued to seek his approval, requesting that Joe Sr. write him a letter about his opinions on different political events and World War II. As a child, Kennedy also strove to meet his mother's expectations to become the most dutiful, religious, affectionate, and obedient of the Kennedy children, but a greater distance grew between him and his father. Rose found his gentle personality endearing, though this was noted as having made him invisible to his father. She influenced him heavily and, like her, he became a devout Catholic. practicing his religion more seriously than the other boys in the family throughout his lifetime. He impressed his parents as a child by taking on a newspaper route, seeking their approval and wishing to distinguish himself. However, he had the family chauffeur driving him in a Rolls-Royce so that he could make his deliveries. His mother discovered this and the deliveries ceased. Joe Sr. was satisfied with Kennedy as an adult, believing him to have become hard as nails, more like him than any of the other children, while his mother believed he exemplified all she had wanted in a child. Mills wrote, his parents' conflicting views would be echoed in the opinions of millions of people throughout Bobby's life. Robert Kennedy was a ruthless opportunist who would stop at nothing to attain his ambitions. Robert Kennedy was America's most compassionate public figure, the only person who could save a divided country. Navy service in Lewiston. 6 weeks before his 18th birthday, Kennedy enlisted in the United States Naval Reserve as a seaman apprentice, but was released from active duty until March 1944 when he left Milton Academy early to report to the V-12 Navy College training program at Harvard College in Cambridge, Massachusetts. His V-12 training was at Harvard Bates College in Lewiston, Maine, and concluded his training at Harvard. While serving in Lewiston, he wrote a letter to David Hackett which reflected his feelings of inadequacy and frustration at being isolated from the action. Things are the same as usual up here, and me being my usual moody self, I get very sad at times. Quote, he added, if I don't get the hell out of here soon I'll die. Aside from Hackett, who was serving as a paratrooper, more of his Parker Hall dorm mates went overseas and left him behind. One of them getting into combat before him was a thought that made him feel more and more like a draft dodger or something. He was also frustrated with the shirkers' mentality of some of the others serving in V-12 at Bates. Kennedy's brother Joseph P. Kennedy, Jr., was killed in action in August 1944, after his bomber exploded during a volunteer mission known as Operation Aphrodite. Robert was most affected by his father's reaction to his eldest son's passing. He appeared completely heartbroken, and his peer Fred Garfield commented that Kennedy developed depression and questioned his faith for a short time. After his brother's death, Kennedy gained more attention, moving higher up the family patriarchy. On December 15, 1945, the U.S. Navy commissioned the destroyer Joseph P. Kennedy, Jr., and shortly thereafter granted Kennedy's request to be released from naval officer training to serve aboard Kennedy starting on February 1, 1946 as a seaman apprentice on the ship's shakedown cruise in the Caribbean. On May 30, 1946, he received his honorable discharge from the Navy. For his service in the Navy, he was eligible for the American Campaign Medal and the World War II Victory Medal. Further study and journalism. In September 1946, Kennedy entered Harvard as a junior, having received credit for his time in the V-12 program. He worked hard to make the Harvard varsity football team as an end, was a starter, and scored a touchdown in the first game of his senior year before breaking his leg in practice. He earned his varsity letter when his coach sent him in for the last minutes of a game against Yale, wearing a cast. His father spoke positively of him when he served as a blocking back and sometime receiver for the faster Dave Hackett. Joseph, Sr., attended some of Kennedy's practices and saw his son catch a touchdown pass in an early season rout of Western Maryland. His teammates admired his physical courage. He was 5 feet 10 and 155 pounds, which made him too small for college football. Despite this, he was a fearless hitter and once tackled the 230-pound fullback head-on. Wally Flynn, another player, looked up in the huddle after one play to see him crying after having broken his leg. Disregarding the injury, he kept playing. Throughout 1946, Kennedy became active in his brother John's campaign for the U.S. representative seat vacated by James Michael Curley, joining the campaign full-time after his naval discharge. Biographer Schlesinger wrote that the election served as an entry into politics for both Robert and John. 2 years later, in March 1948, Robert graduated from Harvard with a bachelor's degree in political science. After graduating, he sailed immediately on the RMS Queen Mary with a college friend for a 6-month tour of Europe and the Middle East. Accredited as a correspondent for the Boston Post, filing 6 stories. 4 of these stories, submitted from Palestine shortly before the end of the British Mandate, provided a first-hand view of the tensions in the land. He was critical of British policy on Palestine, and praised the Jewish people he met there, calling them hardy and tough. He held out some hope after seeing Arabs and Jews working side by side, but, in the end, feared that the hatred between the groups was too strong and would lead to a war. In September 1948, he enrolled at the University of Virginia School of Law in Charlottesville. Kennedy adapted to this new environment, being elected president of the Student Legal Forum, where he successfully produced outside speakers including James M. Landis, William O. Douglas, Arthur Kroc, and Joseph McCarthy, and his family members Joe Sr. and John F. Kennedy. Kennedy's paper on Yalta, written during his senior year, is deposited in the Law Library's treasure trove. On June 17, 1950, Kennedy married Ethel Skakel at St. Mary's Catholic Church in Greenwich, Connecticut. His brother John served as his best man. Kennedy graduated from a law school in June 1951 and flew with Ethel to Greenwich to stay in his father-in-law's guest house. The couple's first child, Kathleen, was born on July 4, 1951. Kennedy spent the summer studying for the Massachusetts bar exam. During this time, his brother John tried to keep Joe Sr. at arm's length. The brothers rarely interacted until Robert was contacted by Kenny O'Donnell to repair the relationship between John and the father during John's Senate campaign. As a result of this, Joe Sr. came to view Kennedy favorably as reliable and willing to sacrifice himself for the family. In September 1951, he went to San Francisco as a correspondent for the Boston Post to cover the convention concluding the Treaty of Peace with Japan. In October 1951, he embarked on a 7-week Asian trip with his brother John and the sister Patricia to Israel, India, Vietnam, and Japan. Because of their age gap, the two brothers had previously seen little of each other. This 25,000-mile trip came at the behest of the father and was the first extended time they had spent together, serving to deepen the relationship. On this trip, the brothers met Liaquat Ali Khan just prior to his death by assassination, and India's Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru.